First up, I'm going to show you the Opera event. To start the fight, you talk to Barnes' stage manager. Every week, you have one of 3 possible boss fights. This week in particular, I had Wicket, so I'm going to show you that first. As the other boss fights come up, I can add those to the video later. In this fight, you have 2 main mobs. You have Elphira and Galindra. They're active at the same time and they share HP. Their basic attacks are Drury Bolt and Flashy Bolt. You can interrupt these, you can help reduce a little bit of the incoming damage to the tank. The main mechanic here is Elphira's Defy Gravity. Thus she launches at you these purple bolts, they've got swirls on the ground, move out of that, they leave a vortex where they land. When you jump into a vortex, you get launched into the air and the vortex is consumed. What you want to do is wait until Galindra starts casting her Magic Magnificence. Then you find your vortex, jump in the vortex, get launched in the air, and all is okay. Periodically, Elphira summons Winged Assistants. They just throw stuff, they're kind of a nuisance, they're also pretty easy to kill. DPS those down, don't let them get out of hand. Eventually, I just kind of started letting our hunter take care of it. If you're melee, or if you're nearby the tank at all, watch out for the glowy circle. Just don't stand in that, and you'll be okay. For this fight, if you can handle the Defy Gravity and Magic Magnificent mechanic, you'll be okay. We lost somebody early on, and while it took us longer to down the boss, we had no problems. Let's take a look at the Maiden of Virtue. Stay at least 6 yards apart at all times. Maiden will use Holy Bolt, which chains between players that are closer than 6 yards together. The more it bounces, the stronger it gets, and the last person it hits takes a massive amount of damage. If it's allowed to chain through the entire party, somebody's going to get one shot. Maiden will randomly target a player with Sacred Ground. They have a couple seconds to run as far away from the party as possible, drop their patch, and come back in. Don't linger in the patch because you'll get a debuff that stacks with every tick you're in there. More than one stack will probably start to overwhelm your healer and kill you. The patches spread really quickly, so you want to move as fast as possible. Maiden will use her Holy Shock on the tank. Holy Shock starts to apply a stacking debuff, so you want to interrupt those Holy Shocks as much as possible. When she starts to cast Mass Repentance, the entire party needs to go find the closest stack of Sacred Ground, step in, get one stack, and step out. When Mass Repentance is cast, the entire party gets a 30-second stun that has to be broken by damage. So getting a stack of Sacred Ground will automatically break your stun. Once she's done with her Repentance cast, she gains a shield and starts casting an ability called Holy Wrath. Once your stun is broken, burn through the shield, and make sure you interrupt Holy Wrath once the shield is drawn. If Holy Wrath is allowed to go through, it will one-shot the entire party. The longer this fight goes on, the more hectic it gets, as the ground spreads really quickly, and you might soon find yourself boxed in. Drop your strong DPS cooldowns at the start. You shouldn't need them to burn through her shield after Repentance if all the DPS is still alive. Before you engage Atumen the Huntsman, you need to make sure that all of the trash in his area is killed. If not, you'll have some company during your pull. When the fight starts off, Atumen and Midnight are together, and you can only attack Midnight. Damage her down until she hits 50% and they will separate. In this phase, there's a couple things you have to be aware about. Midnight will use a Mighty Stomp ability that will damage everyone in the area but interrupt spellcasting. When she starts to cast, just stop your spellcast. Midnight also has the ability to summon a bunch of ghost horses in a line that will charge across the room, and you'll have to dodge those. The trickiest part to Phase 1 is the Intangible Presence mechanic. The entire party will get a dispellable debuff, but only one person needs to be dispelled. If the wrong player is dispelled, the entire party takes heavy damage. You need to look for somebody who's got like a purple translucent specter on them. That's the person you have to dispel. If your healer needs some extra eyes, help them out. Phase 2 begins when Midnight hits 50% and the two separate. Midnight will charge around using a couple of abilities. Mostly you can see where they're going to go, so just avoid them. If you're not the tank, stay behind Atumen. He has an ability called Mortal Strike that will hit any players within 12 yards in front of him. When he starts to cast Shared Suffering, you'll see this dark purple circle. The entire party needs to stand in the circle to split the damage from the ability. Midnight will charge around until she reaches 100% HP, and then phase 1 will start all over again. Midnight and Attunement separately have pretty low HP. You should be able to burn Midnight down to 50% very quickly. The first separation is when you should use your strong DPS cooldowns, like Heroism, Time Warp, or Bloodlust if you have them. Once Attunement reaches 0%, Midnight will enrage, and you just have to DPS her down to 0 to end the fight. Before you fight Morose, you need to make sure that at least 2 people are picking up some of the ghost traps. There's 2 ghost traps in the room that you find Morose, and 2 ghost traps in the room before it. Morose is accompanied by 4 adds. These 4 adds are randomly drawn from a pool of 6. 2 of these 4 adds will need to be trapped with the ghost traps. The ones you pick will depend upon the composition that you get. You can look at the dungeon journal for details on what each add actually does. Throwing the trap will actually start the fight, so make sure everybody's ready before you do that. Morose himself will periodically vanish. When he reappears behind somebody, he uses his Garrote ability. Garrote is a dot that persists throughout the entire fight, and can even stack. DPS should be liberal with their personal cooldowns to help out the healer. You should prioritize the 2 adds that aren't trapped first, burn them down, and then focus on Morose. When he gets to 60%, he'll free the other 2 adds and make them immune to traps. At that point, you can decide whether you want to DPS down those adds or just focus on Morose. In this video, we've prioritized the 2 adds that remained, when really we should have killed one and left one of the other ones up and just focused on Morose. If you let the fight go on too long, the Garrote damage stacks a little too high for the healer to manage. Drop all your cooldowns immediately to get your priority targets down and to get a significant chunk of damage on Morose. Curator is a two-phase fight that alternates between active and regenerating. His two main abilities in the active phase use up his mana until he gets to 10%, at which point he starts using Evocation to regain his mana. The two things he does in this phase are Power Discharge and Summon Volatile Spark. Power Discharge targets all the party members and starts forming pools of energy at their feet. The damage from these pools hurts quite a bit, and they can quickly overwhelm the ground. The Volatile Sparks will use Arc Lightning, and they'll also charge around to player locations. Kill the Sparks quickly because their damage starts to stack the longer they're alive. Watch for timers for when the Curator is about to cast Power Discharge. The group wants to stay fairly close together so that all the pools are directed in the same place. It's very easy to run out of room in this fight. When he starts evocating, he takes a lot more damage, so you should save your cooldowns for this phase. Getting the Volatile Sparks down quickly and managing the Power Discharge pools are the key to victory here. Melee DPS in particular needs to pay close attention to his Power Discharge before he evocates. It's very easy to accidentally cut yourself off from being able to attack him. The Shade of Medivh will rotate through 3 basic spells. When he gets to full mana, he'll use the Greater Spell. He channels Piercing Missiles on the tank for 5 seconds. At the end of the duration, the tank gets a debuff that makes him take more arcane damage. Inferno Bolt targets a random player, dealing damage to them and also splash damage to players in 8 yards of them. Frostbite targets a player and freezes them in place. All 3 of these spells are interruptible, but because he's constantly casting, you won't be able to interrupt all of them. Your group will have to coordinate and prioritize interrupts. To avoid the tank getting a debuff, make sure Piercing Missiles is interrupted. It's also important that Frostbite be interrupted so that players aren't randomly frozen. However, if somebody does get frozen, you can run the Inferno Bolt Splash over to them, and it'll thaw them out. When Medivh gets to full mana, he uses 1 Greater Spell. He has 3 Greater Spells to choose from. Ceaseless Winter will cover the entire ground in ice and apply a stacking debuff to everybody. Every time you move around, you lose a stack of the debuff, so make sure you keep moving. His Greater Fire ability is Flame Wreath. Flame Wreath picks 2 players and wreaths them in flame. If you cross the wall of fire, the entire raid is one shot. When he starts casting Flame Wreath, don't move, stay there until it's over. Lastly, his arcane ability is Guardian's Image. During this cast, the Shade of Medivh splits into several images. These images will cast Arcane Bolt, but they'll also use an ability called Shimmer. Shimmer is a stacking debuff that causes you to take more and more arcane damage. Defeat the images and get back to Medivh. Use your DPS cooldowns on the pull while you're not dealing with the greater spells. The main mechanic of the Mana Devourer fight is to keep him from reaching full mana. If he reaches full mana, he will one-shot the group. He starts off the fight by opening little void zones around the field. You don't want to stand in those yet. He'll also start casting Arcane Bomb, which is just a glowing circle on the ground. If you stay in it, you'll take massive damage. When the Mana Devourer uses Coalesce power, he'll drop all of his mana on the ground. You'll see purple glowing orbs. You need to go pick those up. However, for every orb that you pick up, you'll get a stacking debuff. The debuff deals quite a bit of damage and gives you a small damage increase, but the damage increase is negligible. You're not going to be able to get much out of it because of the stacking damage. Grab a couple of the manas. Don't get too many. Don't overwhelm your healer. And then you go drop them off in the void zones. For every tick of the void zone, you lose a stack of your mana. You're not trying to pick up every bit of loose mana on the ground, you're just trying to pick up enough to keep the Mana Devourer from reaching max mana. It's probably a good idea to use all of your strong DPS cooldowns on the pull when you don't have much to worry about, and then use that mana phase to focus on picking up mana. The final boss of Karazhan is Vizdoom the Watcher. This is a fight in 3 phases. Phase 1 lasts until 66%. To start off, he has several abilities you'll have to keep aware of. First one is called Command Fell Beam. The Fell Beam will fixate a player and start leaving fiery patches on the ground. Kite that away from the group and don't box yourself in. Next, he has Command Bombardment. That is going to be all those green swirls that you start seeing. They get everywhere. Focus on staying out of that. You also need to watch out for Disintegrate. He turns around, targets a player, and casts the attack. Disintegrate will knock you back, which isn't a problem on the first phase, but is a huge problem on the next phases. Just sidestep out of it when you see him casting. DPS needs to help the tank interrupt the Burning Blast attack. If it goes through, it leaves a dot on the tank and it does a lot of damage. Your healer can dispel it, but they're going to need their mana for this fight. That being said, with all the nonsense going on here, it can be difficult to keep your interrupts up, so if 1 or 2 get through, it's not a big deal. Last but not least, you need to be aware of Chaotic Shadows. In Phase 1, Chaotic Shadows targets 1 player. That player has about 10 seconds to run out of the group and get away from everybody. When the debuff expires or is dispelled, they release a bunch of shadowy orbs that go out in a circle. Everybody else needs to try to dodge these orbs. At 66%, he opens up a portal and you follow him through. You land on one end of the ship and Vizdoom is on the other. You're going to have to run to the end to re-engage him. In between you and the boss are these pylons that do like an arcing AoE. While you're running, he's also casting Disintegrate at you. What you want to do is kind of zigzag through the pylons so that you're not actually getting damaged by them, but you're also not getting hit by Disintegrate. So time your movements with the cast. As he completes the cast, you want to be hiding between 2 pylons and then you can continue on your way. Same thing as Phase 1, except he doesn't do his Fell Beam anymore. He'll keep doing Bombardment, which is now significantly harder to dodge due to your being on a much more confined space. And now, instead of 1 player with Chaotic Shadows, you get 2. At 33%, he opens up another portal and jumps to the final Legion ship. Once again, you have to chase him down. On the 3rd ship, Vizdoom will start a 30-second channel called Stabilize Rift. You need to get to him and interrupt it before he finishes the cast, or else he'll be overwhelmed with ads. On this ship, instead of pylons, you have to deal with 6 Felguard sentries. They don't hit too terribly hard if you're a tank, and they don't have a lot of HP. If you find it hard to kill them all before the channel completes, you can send somebody up ahead of you just to interrupt it, and then pull the mobs up with you so you can start cleaving them down along with the boss. Same thing as Phase 2, except now you have 3 players with Chaotic Shadows. The pure chaos of Phase 3 is why I would recommend that you make sure you have your DPS cooldowns up for this, and that you pop your Heroism or Bloodlust here. But you might find it's more beneficial to burn through Phase 2. I recommend Phase 3, but it is what works for your group. And if you survive all that, you will have cleared Karazhan, and congratulations.